James, thanks so much for taking the time to join me today on A Productive Conversation. First off, tell me a little bit about you.
Sure. So I'm a lecturer in psychiatry and violence researcher at the Yale School of Medicine. That's not how I started my life, however. I started my life as a lawyer. And I started my life as a lawyer because, in part, of a pretty horrific bullying experience that I had as a kind of as a teenager. And that happened when my family moved or my dad and my parents moved my brother and I to a farm in central Pennsylvania, kind of a small farm that had been owned by my great grandfather. And when we got there, I was about 12 years old, and I wanted to become friends with the surrounding farm kids who lived on these big dairy farms that were in central Pennsylvania. And unfortunately, they weren't having it. They were not welcoming me into their community. And I think this was in large part because I wasn't born on that farm or raised there, and my folks weren't farmers. My dad was an insurance agent. So he was rolling out of bed maybe around 8 or 9. Well, probably eight's too generous, maybe around 9.
Sounds like
He
me
was
as the
probably
night owl. Yeah.
He was probably rolling out of bed around 9 and, heading off to work in the town nearby wearing a suit and some pretty nicely polished shoes, whereas, their folks were rolling out of bed maybe around 4 and hitting the milking parlor around 5, and they're wearing, boots covered with manure and overalls, and so there was a difference in economic disparity, a difference in maybe lifestyle, and I was a true outsider, and they had a pretty tight, really nice community. But I wanted to be part of that community, and actually, I was so fascinated with farming, I wanted to become a farmer. That was kind of my dream throughout most of my high school years was to do that. But as they yeah, and to fulfill that actually, to become more part of that group, I enrolled in VOAG classes in high school, and I was in the Future Farmers of America Club, and I was
Hmm.
going to farm shows and wearing trucker stuff and cow breeding hats and all that kind of stuff to just be part of that community. But like I said, they weren't having it, and they started bullying me. And the older I got, the more severe this bullying became.
Hmm.
And they started as words, and then kind of small assaults and things like that, pushing and shoving, and then it came to once in a while throwing a closed fist punch and kicking me around, and it was a pretty rotten experience, or it became that way. And
Right.
but this was the early '80s, and
Hmm.
so my school didn't have anti-bullying programs, and this was kind of something that you were expected to solve yourself, put up with, or retaliate. I mean, whatever it was kind of something that kids would resolve by being kids.
Yeah. It's interesting because bullying now has definitely taken on a different form, right? When my kids mention bullying to me, it's very much like that's bullying now. Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Whereas for it's like that's really what it is. But yeah, I mean, things change. But one thing that doesn't change, obviously, is and this has been around for a long time. As we're circling back to the idea of revenge and the science of it, again, not something that I would have thought you would explore in a scientific fashion. And, I mentioned right off the top that it's something that I almost would see from a vantage point go, oh, this is for me, number one, I don't find myself to be a very vengeful person. But instead of looking as to why, revenge is such for, as you mentioned, a deadly addiction, I would avoid it. I'd be like, well, this is not for me. Why did you decide I'm going to dig into that? Did it have a lot to do with what the story you just shared about, like, hey, I want to get back at things, or well, like what led you down this path to study revenge in more specifically a scientific fashion?
Yeah, sure. Eh, I should probably finish that story. So,
Sure.
what I gave you right now is just the tip of the iceberg. one night, my family and I were asleep at night, and we were awakened in our farmhouse to the sound of a gunshot. And we ran to the windows to see what was going on. And I saw a pickup truck speeding away. It was a truck that I was familiar with, owned by one of the guys, one of the farm kids who had been bullying me. So, I'm around 16, 17 years old now. And all of these guys were of driving age, as was I. We looked around the house, didn't see any damage, and went back to bed. One of my jobs the next morning, though, was to go out and take care of our animals. We had a small herd of black Angus cattle and some pigs and chickens. We also had a hunting dog, a beagle, a small, beautiful beagle named Paula. And when I went to her pen to feed and water her that morning, I found her with a bullet hole in her head and a pool of blood, lying dead in her pen, which was a pretty horrific, as you can imagine, experience. And all for what, right? I mean, it was pretty hard to imagine uh, how my efforts to try and befriend these guys had led now to killing our dog. So it was pretty bad. My parents called the police, state police at that time, covering
Mhm.
a big area, and they were like, "Yeah, this is pretty bad, but not a lot we can do about it. You've reported it. We'll keep it on record. If it gets worse, let us know, but we're moving on, unfortunately."
Jeez.
And so about 2 weeks later, I was home alone at night. My parents were out somewhere, and I heard a vehicle come to a stop in front of our house. Somewhat late at night, as I was getting up to look outside to see what was going on, there was a flash and an explosion. And, I could see coming out of the smoke of this explosion that same pickup truck and leaving behind our mangled mailbox. They had, like put an M80 inside inside our mailbox and blew it up. And, with that, destruction of our mailbox, came the destruction of my ability to control, my rage any longer. I had had it. I had put up with this abuse for years. Uh, I was a hunter. My parents were hunters. We had lots of guns. I'd been shooting guns since I was about 8 years old, and I went and I grabbed a loaded revolver from my dad's nightstand and went and jumped in, my mom's car, and I took off down this, one-lane country road as fast as I could after these guys screaming and shouting at the top of my lungs. And I eventually caught up with them, and I cornered them near a barn on one of their farms. And so it was me behind their truck with my brights on, and I could see 3 or 4 heads in the window of their pickup truck. And they slowly got out and, they're squinting back through my brights. And, the one thing I was sure of at that point is that they were unarmed and they couldn't have known I had a gun.
Mhm.
And, I wanted to retaliate so badly, and, I started to get out. I grabbed the gun off of the passenger seat. But as I was getting out, I had this, just brief, very brief flash of insight that if I went and killed these guys, and it would have been so easy, they wouldn't have known what was coming. Uh, I'd essentially be killing the guy I knew I was at that time and up to that point in my life, whether it was for real, if I had gotten uh, shot down in a gunfight, or if the police had taken me out, or whatever, or I'd have been arrested and spent my life in jail, or I'd have gotten away with it, but I had to know that I was a murderer now. And that wasn't something I was willing to accept. I knew I was raised better than that. And it was a price. Getting the revenge that I really, really, really wanted against these guys was just far much more costly than I was willing to pay. And that was just enough to cause me to change my mind at the last second, get back in the car, put the gun down, and drive home. It was a moment that, changed my life. And those 2 seconds of time are 2 seconds that for way too many people, especially here in the United States, are 2 seconds in which they go forward with that gunfire.
Mhm.
And that is why I've become a researcher in revenge seeking and violence, because we know now that revenge is the singular root motivation for almost all forms of violence, from intimate partner violence and youth violence and bullying up through street and gang violence. uh, violent extremism, terrorism, and even war. All of those things are the result of a perceived grievance, that is a perceived uh, feeling of having been mistreated or wronged, and a resulting desire to retaliate and punish the person who did that to you. We've all experienced it. It's part of our human genetic makeup. But the ability to control that desire for revenge and to make decisions about it is something that is definitely within our power. Even though we all may want revenge, we don't all take it in violent ways. And I needed and wanted to know more about why we do this. And that's what led me to this point.
As you were talking about this, I couldn't help but think of a couple things came to mind. Number one, there's that quote from, I think, the Joker that says, "Batman, you're one bad day away from being me."
Wow. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And it's like and there's a reason that those two characters are so intrinsically linked, because it's literally a choice that happened. The pause, right? Like you said. Another thing that and again, I think story plays a lot of role, because you literally, as you were sharing the story, which was both harrowing and fascinating all at the same time, is that pause, that moment where you kind of said, what would happen to me after I take this action or set of actions, right?
Mhm.
And you could literally visualize, not only what you would be losing, but what would come from that. And it got me thinking, weirdly enough, about professional wrestling, which is, I know, a bit of a weird scenario to go down, but professional wrestling as a theater is almost like you get to see what happens to the bad guys when then they'll get their comeuppance. But bad guys have the propensity to turn good, and good guys have a propensity to turn bad, and all of this stuff. And as somebody who watches it and is fascinated by it, and by the way, like folks like Rick Rubin, Jon Stewart, there's lots of quote people that you would not necessarily think. I mean, Rick Rubin invested money into a wrestling organization back in the day. Uh, Almost seeing those stories play out acts as a bit of a bellwether, or some kind of, like, hey, this is what can happen to you when you go down this path, because there is the aggression that goes on. There's also the psychological stuff. It's really interesting. And you talked about the addiction piece. This comes right out of the introduction. The idea of the brain on revenge is like a brain on drugs, your brain on drugs. Can you kind of dive into that a little bit? Because I think, as I'm talking about this with you, the perspective I've gotten of, oh yeah, what Joker said to Batman, and watching this pro wrestling, that's enough of a pause to say, okay, well, this is not an area I want to go down. But it seems to me that the pause, you really have to work for the pause if you're so immersed in kind of the obsession of vengeance.
Yeah, you do, or you may have to, and it may happen at an unexpected point of weakness in your life. So let's just talk about what happens inside your brain, and that's what the new neuroscience shows. This is just information that's just coming out. It's been the result of the last 20 years of neuroscience research studies by more than 60 neuroscientists at universities around the world. So here's what it looks like. Um, It starts with a grievance. A grievance is a real or imagined perception of having been mistreated, been betrayed, disrespected, humiliated, wronged, or victimized in any way. And when that occurs, and we all experience that experience of grievance
Hmm.
multiple times, pretty much every day of our lives. Something's going to go wrong. We're going to feel aggrieved. Somebody's going to do something that's going to upset us. Or we're gonna imagine that having happened, and that's critical. It can be imagined. The imagination is just as powerful as the reality.
Do you think that as you're talking about this really quickly, also the compounding things that happen to you throughout the day, the one
Mhm.
weird thing that could trip you, which has not like the person that parks in your parking spot, right? Even though I mean that's the worst. But if everything's gone to pot that whole day, and then you get to all of a sudden you see that person there taking that spot, which they've done repeatedly. Like it's that too, right? I guess that would also fall into this category of just like the compounding effect where there's just something that triggers you that should really not.
Yeah, yeah, that's a good point to make, and, I think, we haven't studied a lot about that compounding effect, but what it leads to is each one of those grievances that you might have during a day is, it let me explain what happens inside your brain. When you have a
Mhm.
grievance like this, it activates the pain network inside your brain. So these grievances we were just discussing, that's real, physical, biological pain inside your brain, and it activates this area of the brain called the anterior insula. And when that occurs, the brain, your brain doesn't like pain. It wants pain to go away and it wants to rebalance itself. And so it's going to look for a dose of pleasure. And we've evolved so that we experience enormous pleasure and satisfaction from punishing the people who wrong us. We get a lot of pleasure, a drug like high, a dopamine release when we punish the people who hurt us. And so, and whether that's real or imagined doesn't matter. If
Right.
it's real enough for you, and it's triggering a desire for revenge, a craving for revenge, then it's real enough for you to act on that craving. Whether a million people who were seeing the same situation would go, I don't know why that's bothering that guy at all. That just doesn't matter in the least.
Right.
So, what occurs though for the brain to get this release of dopamine, it starts, it feels this initial release of dopamine, which is this uh, uh, kind of imagined feeling of what revenge getting will do for you in terms of making you feel really great. This bigger hit of dopamine, and then that initial dopamine release, it dies down rather quickly, and that's what spurs the craving. That craving experience with drugs and alcohol, or with revenge, or gaming, or gambling, or whatever it is, internet addiction, food, sex, all these things. Um, there's this craving aspect, which is the motivation that motivates you to go and get the thing. And that goes on until you can get it. And when you get it, you're going to get this even bigger high of
Mhm.
dopamine release. But like all of these, all drug-like highs, and that's what this is, it'll make you feel great for a little while, and then you'll ultimately feel worse, but if you're in an addictive state, start craving more. So up until this point, what I've said is all very natural. Um, it's not a pathological disease process. When it becomes pathological and moves into an addiction is when you're unable to control your desire for revenge despite knowing the negative consequences that'll follow. And that's generally the definition of an addiction is inability to control a desire despite the negative consequences. And where the control aspect comes from is your prefrontal cortex. That's
Right.
your executive function and self control circuitry that helps you make good cost benefit decisions and just good decision making overall. If that's been hijacked or inhibited in any way, and that could happen, like you just said, from that loading, that all day long set of grievances, and now you just no longer have the capacity to overlook another grievance. And so that last, perhaps minor one is the one that sets you off, but there were 10 before it that really built up and reduced your self-control strategy.
The,
That's what can happen. Yeah,
the straw, as Janet put in the chat, the straw that broke the camel's back. Right. Like that.
exactly right.
And as you're talking, there's a couple things that came to mind as you're talking about this. When you said grievance, the first thing as a writer, my brain went to grief.
Mm,
Grief and grievance. Now, what's interesting about that to me is uh you would think that revenge and grief are like grief is sad, like the despair, sadness, right? Like and revenge just seems so correlated and adjacent to anger, to all of that stuff. It, it I wonder, whether or not uh that's that pause. I guess it's that pause that you've talked about. It's and the when we bring it back to the idea of productivity and time management, is that, and this, I can't tell you how many times, James, that on conversations like, so really what would benefit us is just taking a pause, taking a beat, taking a breath. And yet we live in a world that conspires not to give us the wherewithal to think that we can do that. It's fascinating to me that I mean, even that compounding, if you see that person, you're like, okay, so what is this really about? What, just, can we go down that path a little bit? Because the other thing we could talk about is that idea of revenge bedtime procrastination that people have talked about. The idea of where they delay until it's so late, and then they delay going to bed, and they get all the stuff done, and then they have a crappy sleep. And it's just, again, that perpetuation that can happen there too. So it's showing up in a variety of different ways when the response seems to be a misguided one. Yet you still get the dopamine hit like you would with inbox zero, like just checking off an email, checking off it. It's not big, but it compounds. And the same thing with when you feel happy, you accomplish something, you get, that feels good, I got that done. There's almost that same thing going on with revenge too.
You're exactly right, and it's probably important for us to acknowledge that most forms of revenge seeking are not violent.
Right.
But they are and can be extremely destructive. So, you can have revenge seeking that is uh, an insult, which is truly and purely verbal, but it could be a light insult. It could be social exclusion, where you're excluding somebody from your group, like the way that the guys started with me,
Hmm.
excluding me from their community. You could have it from social exclusion, in which you are truly shunning somebody. You can have workplace sabotage. You can have sabotaging a relationship that's valuable to you, like with an intimate partner or with a child or a parent, in which you start to disengage with it, or you start to sabotage it. You start to do things that are going to harm this person and bother them, but they're not violent. And then that can progress up through the various levels of violence that we've already discussed. So it's a wide range of things that people can do to harm or punish the other person for their own gratification. And it's important to remember that we're doing this because the brain wants the pleasure to balance the pain of that initial grievance or that compounding of grievances that have occurred. And so we're seeking pleasure to help us feel better after the pain. But the only way to gratify this craving and restore pleasure and balance for us, we believe, and it's not true, but that's how we're wired at first, is to hurt the other person. To gratify this craving is to inflict pain on another person. But we know, a hammer can't avoid the impact of the blow on a nail. Both sides experience that. And when you become the instrument of someone else's pain, you can't avoid experiencing that pain infliction yourself. And you'll either experience it instantly in that moment, or it may last a long time. But going back to this concept of grievance that you said, and I'm sorry to
No,
keep
no,
that,
no.
but I thought that was important,
This is
is
good.
that, uh, we need to distinguish between, let's say, self defense and revenge seeking.
Right.
And that's when grievance comes in, because what we know, self-defense is defending yourself, and it's perfectly fine to do. Defending yourself in the present moment, because because what exists before you is a present or near future threat of imminent, bodily harm to you or someone you love. That's self-defense, and that's going to activate your fight or flight instincts, which are
Hmm.
also evolved throughout human history. That's and we need to think about that as present future. Revenge seeking is always focused on the past. It's focused on a memory of a grievance or a wrong that happened either minutes, hours, months, years, or decades ago. It could have happened in your childhood, and you're still thinking about and remembering these grievances. And that's where I think the idea of grief comes from here, is that you're grieving over this pain. You're grieving over this injustice that you've experienced. and you haven't healed it, you haven't let it go. And the most exciting part of my research isn't discovering revenge as an addictive process, but it's actually discovering a couple of other ways that we're wired, namely and most importantly, forgiveness as a process for actually healing pain and reversing all of those addictive brain biological circuitry. All of that gets shut down when you forgive somebody. So it's really a gift to yourself, not to the perpetrator.
I'm going to get to forgiveness here in a minute, but there's a couple things I want to unpack a bit more around that. So, you talked about revenge being rooted in the past wrongdoings, but to go back to the revenge bedtime procrastination aspect, or even just looking back at what you've accomplished and what you failed to accomplish in your, work life, whatever, if you're looking at the tasks and stuff, what does it look like when you're taking revenge on a past version of yourself? Because is that something that, I want to go, can we go down that path? Because I think so, it's insidious and it can hide, and you're not necessarily grasping it until you're at a point where, oof, oh, that's what was going on, right? So can we
Oh, sure.
dive into that a little bit as well? Because forgiveness will play a role in that, obviously, too.
It will. But revenge against oneself, in other words, holding grievances against yourself, which is nothing other than, we can think of that as self disappointment, self vision of I'm a failure, or I failed at this or that, or I should have done this when I did that, and beginning this self grievance process, which leads to self revenge and self sabotage, and up through and including the ultimate act of self revenge, which would be a suicide, in which you're punishing yourself with the ultimate punishment for something that you feel that you've done wrong, and you can no longer tolerate that even you yourself exist. That is that is one of the motivations for suicide, and as you said, it's insidious. It's a dangerous one, and we can sabotage ourselves in many other ways, denying ourselves self love, denying ourselves the opportunity to recover from and succeed after failure by continuing to ruminate on and punish ourselves for failures of the past, and so that we can no longer get into a successful present and future, which is available to us only though if we can finally heal from these wrongs of the past and our pain and grief that we carry around about them.
So let's talk about forgiveness as a counterweight, because, and again, most of I'll circle back to the idea that when we get into conversations like this, we see qualitative stuff emerge, not quantitative, but qualitative, right? And we live in a world that I believe, and I mean, it's pretty easy to see if you're looking at it from the outside in, that it's speed, go fast, check off as many boxes as you can. Like there's a numerical quotient to that. Whereas forgiveness doesn't seem to have that. And so when you hear the term counterweight, I want you to kind of address the idea of how much forgiveness does one need to counter the feelings of vengeance and revenge that are going on? Is there some kind of, because people are looking for that, okay, well, what's the cure? How do I solve this? And to me, it doesn't feel like, and going through your book, it doesn't feel like it's a one and done proposition like so many other things. It's a process, right?
It's a practice. Let me just explain quickly what's going on inside your brain when you forgive. So what
Sure.
I explained right now is that up to this point is a grievance, which is this pain, activates the pain network in your brain, which activates then the pleasure and reward circuitry of addiction. That's the nucleus accumbens in the dorsal striatum, causing this craving to retaliate for pleasure to make ourselves feel better. And if our prefrontal cortex is not there and available to stop us from inflicting some sort of revenge driven harm upon another person, we'll do it. And that can lead to the most horrific acts of violence that you can imagine. And I describe in my book, throughout human history, almost all of the wars, all of the great villains of human history have been revenge addicts and been motivated almost exclusively by their desire for revenge, which is to say, Almost all perpetrators in human history see themselves as victims first.
Yes.
You only become a perpetrator by first seeing yourself as a victim. That is the essential ingredient, except for the rare sociopath or psychopath whose brain is very different from the majority. But they're rare people. Most acts of violence are not performed by those people. They're performed by all people, the regular people in the world. We cannot distinguish between you know a small group of so-called evil people and the rest of us. That's not really a thing.
Yeah.
What is a thing is that there's a group of people who really struggle to control their revenge desires. And now we have a brain biological explanation for that and a way to prevent and treat it by using normal addiction strategies that we use: counseling, motivational interviewing, cognitive behavioral therapy, even anti-craving drugs may become useful now, like the GLP-1s that are used to reduce food cravings. Uh, are being studied for addiction cravings. And if that pans out as it looks like it's going to, then the next step is to study that against revenge cravings. But that's all what's going inside your brain with revenge. Now, here's the cool thing about
Mm.
forgiveness. Inside a brain scanner, if somebody has a grievance and they're asked to simply imagine forgiving the grievance, here's what happens. That pain network, the anterior insula, forgiveness shuts that down as soon as you start imagining that you've forgiven a grievance or forgiven someone for something they've done to you. So just by even imagining that you're forgiving that person, the pain goes away. Unlike revenge, which merely covers up the pain with a temporary hit of dopamine, like any other drug or alcohol, forgiveness is actually the cure because it shuts down the pain, it eliminates it. The next thing it does is it shuts down that craving and reward circuitry of addiction, so it stops the revenge craving. And the third thing it does is it reactivates that prefrontal cortex in your brain, the self control area. So now you've got excellent decision making, you've got the pain resolved, and you've got the cravings gone. All for what? For free. I mean, forgiveness is this wonder drug that we don't even realize is this powerful. You don't need a doctor, you don't need a prescription, you don't have to pay a pharmacy. All you need to do is start to imagine forgiving something and you will feel it. What you said about doing it, though, is critical. Forgiveness is something you can. It's not that you must do, but you must do it because it works and it makes you feel so good, and you'll want to do it. So you do it over and over again. The famous teaching from Jesus was, and when asked, "Well, how many times am I supposed to forgive somebody? 7?" And he's like, "No, not 7. 70 times 7." So it's something that you can take and do over and over again until these painful memories of the wrongs of the past, which are infecting and ruining your present and future, until those stop bothering you, you just need to forgive them. It's an incredibly powerful experience. And it's not a gift to the perpetrator, it's a gift to yourself. It's the only way you can truly heal yourself.
It's funny as you're talking about, I can't help but think about the truism, which, I mean, forgive and forget. It's in the right order too. You can't forget and forgive. You have to do it in that order, right? Like there's a reason that it's phrased that way.
And
But
you don't know necessarily have to forgive, I wanna say. I'm sorry, you
forget.
don't nearly have to forget.
Right.
Like, in other words, eventually, and it can come very quickly if you're
There's
methodical about
there's
it.
distance though. You
Yeah,
increase the
right.
distance, right? Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I mean, you can remember the grievance and go, I remember that happening. And it's important for me to, let's say, because I want to know not to, let's say, get into that kind of relationship again or do
Hmm.
this again or watch out for this kind of person, things that will protect you. It's okay to do that, but you'll be able with forgiveness to have those memories without them tanking the rest of your life and the rest of your day.
Yeah, and that letting go, I've experienced it. I think everybody who's listening to this will have experienced there's a freedom to it, right? Like there's just a freeing element to it. Before I let you go, it would be remiss of me not to discuss, media, culture, things that we're exposed to, things that draw. I mean, I talk about productivity being the link between intention and attention. You can have all the intention to, forgive and to try not to let these grievances take, hold of you in a way that isn't productive. But when we're bombarded with things that are trying to capture our attention, both, neither good nor bad. It's just, I mean, we live in a world that is not just moving at a very quick pace, but also offering us more information than we've ever been had access to in the past. I mentioned superheroes off the top. It's really interesting that the DC Comics supergroup is called the Justice League and Marvel's is called the Avengers, which is fast. But yet inside of the Justice League, they've got Batman who says, "I am vengeance," and then yet you've got it's the balance of different people in it is rather interesting. But when when it comes to media and culture and how our attention is constantly under attack, probably isn't the right word, but I'll say it anyway. How do we how can we keep that from short circuiting the kind of stuff that we're talking about with in terms of letting forgiveness lead the way when we're getting caught up in the addictive properties of revenge, when we're constantly told, hey, look, the story of this and the story of that. And I mean, as soon as you mentioned, I mean, I can think about Luke Skywalker in Star Wars where he throws his lightsaber away. He goes, "No, I'm not going to kill him," and you cheer, but then you wonder, would I be able to do that in the same scenario? Like, so there's this, and it's the hero's journey, it's the story, all that stuff. How do we kind of make sure that we don't get overtaken by that stuff and having the external forces kind of push us in a direction that we don't want to necessarily find ourselves in with revenge?
Well, like I said, the other way of managing this is through using established addiction prevention and treatment strategies. And the first one of those on the prevention side really is awareness and public education. Awareness that revenge seeking can act like a drug inside your brain and it can hook you, and that it is very likely hooking a lot of the people that you're interacting with if you're, let's say, busy on social media. And social media, humanity was not prepared for the advent of this whatsoever. And so, what you've got are these platforms and these cell phones and computers that we all have direct access to all day long. And they're directly designed so that uh, they're able to spread individual grievances to millions of people about just nearly any topic at light speed so that you have millions of people seeking revenge at the same time. Hugely dangerous. And then these platforms keep us hooked because they're able to help us gratify our desire for revenge by enabling us to instantly blast out mean tweets and spread new grievances to other people, in this vicious circle. And at the worst level, the platforms are there to allow people, in part, to begin to coalesce around grievances and revenge desires and begin planning real world revenge desires. Like, for instance, the January 6th attack on the US
Hmm.
Capitol. That a lot of that planning happened on social media, but a lot of the grievance priming and the revenge craving happened prior to that also on social media. So the first and most important thing I'm trying to do with this book and with media and being on shows like yours is to make people aware of what's happening so that you can make a good choice about whether social media is useful for you or is more dangerous than it's worth. But if you're going to use it, at least use it in a smart way and know what's happening. You're just getting other people's grievances flowing straight into your face out of your cell phone. It's like COVID, but everybody's breathing on your face at the exact same time.
Yeah.
Highly dangerous, right?
Right.
Uh, and then the next thing is to move from, okay, so I've got that. I'm going to try and be more aware of it. What do I do next? Is start to begin to think about your own grievance and revenge cycle levels and what that's doing to you and what that's doing to your life. And if you have a problem, and a problem meaning you're not able to control your craving. We didn't even get the chance to discuss, Mike. I didn't just stop becoming an avenger when I drove away
Yeah.
from the farm. I went into the professional revenge business by becoming a lawyer, where lawyers are the only people in society with the license to prescribe, manufacture, and distribute legalized revenge under the brand name justice to people in society. And I did that for 20 years. It almost destroyed my life. It was a very bad experience. And it wasn't until I realized I was completely revenge addicted, or I believed it. That wasn't even a term then. But that's what led me to become a researcher of this process, and to go to Yale to kind of seriously research it, is that I was convinced that my clients, myself, other lawyers, everybody around me, all of society, there's this prevailing level of revenge addiction everywhere, and we need to start to acknowledge it and do something about it. It's kind of like it's the bubonic plague of modern society. But it's an unseen addiction, just the way it was an unseen bacteria that caused the plague. And we need to actually open our eyes and see what's right at the tip of our nose here. It's this insidious desire for revenge seeking. So you can use addiction strategies, and you could go seek addiction support help for this, or you could use this platform that I've built. It's a free app called the Miracle Court app. And it's this online trial process where you can put on trial anybody who has ever wronged you, but you play all the roles yourself in this imaginary courtroom that we all have inside our mind, where we try, convict, sentence, and punish the people who wrong us. But in this trial, you get to play the victim, the defendant, the judge and jury, the warden who's administering the punishment, and ultimately you get to be the judge of your own life and decide whether or not to free yourself from the wrongs of the past, which is as simple as forgiving them and moving on to the future.
It's avoiding a kangaroo court that goes on inside of your own head.
That is great. That's exactly right. It's taming that kangaroo court.
Yeah, this has been a fascinating conversation. There's so much, I mean, again, because I haven't seen this kind of stuff before, explored in such a singular way, a very, a niching down. The first thing I thought of as we were going to approaching this conversation was like, what a waste of time it is. But revenge. But like with anything, there's nuance. There's lessons to be learned. And the last question I have for you is, you talked about different, strategies, different approaches that you can take. I'm a big believer in journaling. There is something, it creates an anchor for those pauses, whether it's interstitial journaling or you do it at the end of the day or you do it at the start, morning pages, whatever have you found in your work, not just, and the app, we're going to share all this stuff in the show notes, but in terms of journaling, like that to me seems like it's a step in the right direction, especially unless you need to go deeper, which you may need to, depending on the depth of your addiction. But what about journaling when it comes to this practice of kind of keeping revenge at bay, or at least keeping, or maybe elevating forgiveness, when you need to elevate it?
Yeah, I think that there are two. I think of journaling as potentially like thinking, but it's really a more systematized process. You're getting it out on paper. If your journaling is just writing the grievance, right, and you're recording these grievances over and over again, that kind of starts to look like rumination, which can really work against you, right?
You're like
So it has to be fair.
you're like the Steve Buscemi character in Happy Gilmore, where he's or whatever that movie was, where he's like just adding to the list of people that he has grievances against.
That's
And
right.
then and then you're like, that the scene where I hope that guy's fine, and you see that he's really not fine, and you're like, okay, well, I'm glad he got me off the list, because he seemed by all intents and purposes just totally a normal guy.
Right.
You know which scene I'm talking about, right? When he phones the guy up and says, hey, he goes, oh, no, that's fine. And he just takes him off the list and puts lipstick on his mouth. And I'm like, wow, okay, so he dodged a bullet literally and figuratively there. Yeah, that rumination can be a problem, right? Because I mean, it's creating a whole different pattern that you may not want to perpetuate.
Right, it's a dangerous pattern. So the journaling would have to be therapeutic, and it would have to have built into it, and that's why I created this Miracle Court app process, because it helps you maybe systematize that process so that you're doing more than just thinking about the wrong that happened or what this person did to you that was so unjust and unfair, but you're moving beyond that to experience your desire to retaliate. You're safely releasing that inside your mind. That's what happened in the Miracle Court app. And you could do that with journaling. You could imagine, oh, well, if I if I punish them, what would that punishment look like? What would it be? How would it feel to be the one punishing them? And how would it feel to get this revenge? But then move past that to acknowledging, in all cases, you'll feel good at first and then you'll feel a lot worse. And that acknowledgement then needs to be processed into, hmm, so if this didn't really work by the end, then what could I do that would really eliminate the pain so it never comes back? And it's in that process that you can begin to go, what would it truly feel like if I imagined forgiving this grievance? And all your listeners can experience this right now. Think of any grievance that you have against anybody, and your mind should instantly fill with probably 30. Most people do. We have tons of them in our lives. But if you imagine one and you close your eyes if it's safe to do and think about that and then go, all right, how would I feel if I forgave that right now? That's all you need to do is imagine it. Don't forgive the person, just imagine it. What most people will say in that instant is, oh my gosh, I would feel so much better. I feel this weight lifting off my shoulders, is what people say. There's this great feeling of satisfaction and release. That's what forgiveness brings you. And you can have that over and over again until you never think about that pain and that grievance ever again.
James, this has been a great conversation. I want to be respectful of your time. And I want to share before we wrap up on the YouTube video, this is what Janet said. So this has been enlightening. I definitely need to read the book. So Janet, yeah, it's the book is called The Science of Revenge by James Kimmel Jr. Understanding the World's Deadliest Addiction and How to Overcome It. James, where can people pick up the book and keep up with the work that you're doing?
Yeah, so the book's available at, all booksellers. I'm not sure what that looks like in Vancouver, but, Amazon being the monster in the world, you can always get it from there. So it's available now. It was just released on Tuesday, so it is absolutely available at this time. I also have a website, www.jameskimmeljr.com, and that's probably the best place to reach me. And then this app that I was telling you about, the Miracle Court app, it's not in app stores. It's a web-based app.
Yeah.
So it's available on the website, miraclecourt.com. If you go to miraclecourt.com, it's free. You can put it on your cell phone and instantly have an audio-driven experience of putting someone on trial. It's me speaking, so you'll get to hear me if that's good for you. If it's not, try and put up with it.
James, thanks so much for taking the time to have a productive conversation with me today.
Yeah, thank you, Mike. I really appreciate it. Great show.